Yes, so I'm here with Aaron Cynic, the great Chicago journalist who survives every day with bullets flying every which way, covering the politics of the Windy City. This is episode 24 of the Visu.news podcast. How are you doing today, Aaron? Are you surviving?
I am cold and I am cranky.
Yes.
When I woke up this morning, it was -4. And the highest it got today was 7 degrees. I've lived here all my life and I'm used to that kind of thing and it's fine. But you know, you're somewhere sunny and it's also 41 degrees in Alaska. So, it's we're all crabby here today.
You know, I think I finally reached that scary age where I kind of decided I'm done with cold weather. Like, oh shit. I'm gonna have to lose a ton of weight because if I have to move to the south, there's no way I can handle like 90-degree days because I'm a fat upstate New Yorker. But also like everything I've ever said about, I'm just done with it. I just my hands hurt, my knees hurt, and my back always hurts.
Well, that could also be a sign that you're getting old.
I'm saying,
as am I.
Yeah, the cold weather just gets to me more than it used to be. I used to be able to, I've always been relatively insulated, but naturally, due to my my food consumption. But
same. I'm from the Midwest. We have the same problems.
Yeah. What's weird here is though that because it's so you go outside. I'm in a house that's very, very well built for California. So it's actually really, really cool inside to the point that like it's almost cold. And I'm wearing a hoodie right now because it's cool enough inside. But
yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that in in the times I've been to California where certain houses people I've been with who aren't from the Midwest or Chicago or whatever, who don't have winters like this. Yeah. Will it's 60 degrees and people are putting on their jackets and I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt and I'm like, what? I'm from Chicago, man. Like this is, until it drops to 50, like I'm that guy.
I will say though, there's many annoying things about everywhere you go, especially for a person like me. I find those things, but the maddening thing is that everyone here is so skinny. So anyway, which is why I'm like, I'm happy that it's a little cold outside because then I get to wear layers and not show off, that I'm clearly not from around here.
I feel your pain.
But yeah, so it's been I'd say it's been an interesting week, but I feel like it's just been an interesting 24 hours upon itself, which is normal these days, but it's also more so today.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, it's hard for me at this point after the past 24 to 48 hours to even remember cogently what big things happened earlier this week. And that's one fucked up thing about all of this is that you said that that's normal, and the fact that has become normalized is terrible and dangerous, and another sign of the creepingly horrible fascist environment in which we live. But just in the past 36 hours or whatever, we've had just so much happen between the quote unquote temporary fix / end to the shutdown, to massive media layoffs, to Roger Stone getting arrested. It's just been, I don't know how anyone sleeps anymore. At least in this business, unless of course you're one of the thousands of people who were fucking laid off in the past 36 hours, which I don't know how they would sleep either, because I've been laid off. And let me tell you, that's fucking terrible. But then again, as a freelancer, I never sleep, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's been my continuing theme throughout this whole thing. What are the chances that maybe this will be the moment that laid off workers will join in solidarity with the freelance workers, that when the laid off workers had jobs they used to aggressively try, especially at least the editors did, aggressively try to fuck over the freelancers as much as humanly possible. And so maybe we can join together as one. And anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good that's a good starting point. I think, to just talking about those talking about the shitstorm. I mean, all right, so going through it, we lost, Vice is still cutting people, I guess, but the big ones this week were BuzzFeed, Huffington Post. I think was Verizon Media Group also cut some people. Gannett, and it's just sort of, I mean, it's incredible. But I think the thing that I've found most incredible about this is that on the one hand, it started or maybe continued or restarted a conversation that people need to be having literally all the time, which is how do we make media sustainable in all of this? But it's spawned some interesting commentary that I think is necessary in a lot of ways. But there was a Guardian story that came out called "Fears Are Growing That Current Models of Paying for Online Journalism Are Broken." I would argue that they never worked.
It's hard to break something that never really properly functioned.
Well, right, and I think one thing that that still is interesting to see in these analyses is that in that article, let's see, who is this? This was I believe the director. I'm going to probably really get this name wrong, but Rasmus Cleese Nielsen, director of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at Oxford University. One of the quotes that jumped out at me in this story, which I think is something that has been I've seen it discussed here and there on Twitter, but nowhere in this article did it appear outside of this quote, which is, "In some ways, for journalism to succeed as a business, it needs patient investors who are content with incremental growth and modest returns on investment." And when you talk about some of these places, you're talking about these layoffs, the BuzzFeed layoffs, for example, they didn't come because they were strapped for cash. They just weren't making enough money as they saw. They weren't growing as rapidly as they hoped. And this is the problem when you have rich tech dudes and, other, types of investors go, "Oh, I'm just going to buy a media company and whatever." And, I've been on this trip since, I got laid off from Chicagoist and all of that.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of the one thing that we don't see anywhere in a lot of these articles about, say, BuzzFeed, for example, is that it's, the head of BuzzFeed is worth $200 million.
Yeah.
So what are we, why aren't we talking about that?
And the biggest problem comes down to, and I have family that works in venture capital, so I half know a little bit about this and have a little bit of a grudge too. But it's the fact, especially with BuzzFeed. I guess I actually do have to say, full disclosure, I have a family member that actually is part of the venture capital firm that actually helps fund, or whatever the fuck they call it, BuzzFeed. But it's the fact that they treat $300 million isn't enough, and growth at the level that a newspaper or a news publication would have is never ever going to be enough for a VC firm. I mean, hell, they devalued not the VC firm that my family member works for, but VC firms and Wall Street, I guess, in general, devalued Twitter. I think it was last year, because their growth wasn't large enough. I think it was only a couple 100,000 users a month.
Only.
Yeah, only.
I mean, only a couple 100,000 users, only a couple $100 million, right?
Yeah.
And yeah. No, it's just what really kind of irks me in the reporting on this, because, you know, mad love and solidarity to everybody who got laid off, you know, but it's just, you know, everybody just takes as, you know, at this point, again, talking about normalization of really shitty things, we've just normalized the fact that, like, oh yeah, well, a company, you know, not only should they not be losing money, but they also need to be growing at a pace that makes people who are already worth hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, they need to be growing, quote, growing at a pace that makes those people more money so that they could buy another yacht or, you know, land in Montana or what the fuck ever, literally at the expense of those of us who are doing, you know, the on the groundwork every day, who are already scraping to get by just to begin with.
And I think that I personally love the film The Post. That it's one of the first films that I actually liked from Spielberg in a couple of years. But I think everyone at this point should go back and watch that movie, because one of the things I found very interesting, that during the time that they were was it just about to basically break all of the Woodward and Bernstein stories, because the film literally like ends when, oh, Woodward's got some story that he's working on about a break-in, sort of thing. Like, it obviously teases all the President's Men and everything. But they were they were just a small local paper, basically. Or, I mean, they were a local paper for a larger city back then. And so when we think about growth, and we think about growth in publications and news, and particularly, like, the idea that, yeah, it was 40, 50 years ago, but 50 years ago, the Washington fucking Post, which is an international, at minimum, one of the top 4 newspapers in America, if not the top 2. New York, I would say New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, etc. You know, Chicago, like whatever, Chicago, like Trib, maybe now. I don't know whether it's still.
Well, I think you're talking about Tronc.
Yeah, sorry, Tronc. I'm sorry, I always have to say it, Tronc. But it's really interesting to see that, like, these publications were not always behemoths, and the fact that it was this slow move, and that's the way that they were able to develop, to me at least, the way they were able to develop within the news media, slowly and progressively, not in the political way, but like moving forward and growing larger, but not at this fast-paced, necessary, Nate way that, you know, I mean, we think about, you know, remember there was the dot-com boom in the late 90s and early 2000s. Most of those sites are gone. Remember pets.com? I mean, hell, even porn.com, I think, is gone. It was like, that used to be a site. And so it's the fact that we've now had 2 cycles of these crashes. And mind you, this isn't a crash. Like, it's not like BuzzFeed went away, you know, and so it's not a crash in the way that they lost, you know, billions of dollars of valuation or capital or whatever the fuck all those things are, in a moment, like the boom or the crash that happened, 2000, was it 99, 2000?
Yeah.
But it's the fact that we continue not to learn our lessons from this, and
go on. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, but basically, we continue not to learn our lessons from this model. If we're talking about news publications as digital publications, kind of like this Guardian article that you sent me, you know, as HuffPost and BuzzFeed shed staff, has the digital content bubble burst, and it's just like, we continue not to learn lessons that we should have learned about what sustainable growth is within content. And I'm putting up big, I fucking despise that term, but content works. I mean, we've had MySpace went away, Friendster went, all these content distribution sites, essentially, which is all that, you know, they're not really social media sites, they're content distribution sites for when you look at it, at least from news and from entertainment publications. I don't know. I guess that there's no benefit for venture capital firms or just in general Wall Street to learn from these lessons, because everybody's going to get their money and make their money or lose their money and then get out. And so Chris Hayes, actually within this article, but I saw separately, is Chris Hayes said, MSNBC, it's weird that they call him a MSNBC presenter, but that's a British term. I forgot this is the Guardian. Anyway, forget it. I just was like, that seems a little condescending, but like, as much as whatever you feel about Chris Hayes, like, he at least used to be a journalist. But anyway, what if Chris Hayes said on Twitter, what if there is literally no profitable model for digital news, or none that actually scales and endures without, say, the established readership base and brand of the New York Times? And we need to ask that question. And
the thing is, I think, that stuck to me. That stuck in me, because I think, I think on the one hand, I understand the question, but on the other hand, it makes some kind of disingenuous presumptions that don't do enough to say that, well, maybe rich people, investing in things as just sort of playthings isn't the model, and maybe there needs to be something else. Because we've relied on that for what seems to be forever, but as you pointed out with the post and all of that, it's not. And I'm gonna read this a tweet in a thread from Aaron Beatty, who is a writer and editor at popula.com and a few other places, but he had a little thread, which is how I found this Guardian article. But one of the things he says is, if you want a sustainable model for media, reinvest revenue in the business itself instead of draining off profits to enrich investors is just sitting there. We could try that. Otherwise, I'm afraid we might have to abolish capitalism. And that, to me, I think is brilliant and perfect. And I think too, there's another story that came out in the Columbian Journalism Review today from Alex Perrine, where it talks about the fact that for all the work that a lot of journalists do, the money that people are paying for it, a lot of that money is being scooped up by ISPs and other content providers. So, the story points out, readers still love the news. The majority of American households are still spending $50 to $70 a month for internet service, on top of $30 to $100 per line for mobile internet. They do so to have access to Netflix, porno, email, and of course, but they're absolutely also paying to read the news. Tens of millions of people read, BuzzFeed, Gizmodo, Slate, the New York Times Monthly, and every one of them that is not browsing at a public library or stealing Wi-Fi is paying for the privilege. They're just not paying the people who are making it. And, Alex goes on to say, we need to talk about, solutions that come from policy, not from entrepreneurs or consultants or venture capitalists or whoever. But we need to start talking about this from a policy perspective and from, in my opinion, at least anyway, from a public utility perspective, from a nonprofit perspective, from literally any other alternative than, the rich guy's sad that he can't buy another boat or, an island somewhere. So we're going to have to lay off some more people, and then our product's going to be inferior. Less people are going to pay attention to it, and it's going to disappear, because that's what happens eventually. An inferior, like when you cut newsrooms, when you cut staff, when you cut writers, when you cut photographers, when you make, employee cuts like that, instead of cutting things from somewhere else, or just saying, hey, you know what? $600 million is probably enough money for now. When you do that, your product suffers. And if your only goal is to sell a product, and that's the thing about VC, it's like, that's not even to sell a product. It's just, to get people to pour money into something so you can take it and go somewhere else. Like, that's not sustainable anywhere at all. And so no wonder shit is failing.
And it's so, I mean, we always talk about, I mean, hell, Visu.news is a not-for-profit. It's not a non-profit, but it essentially works as a not-for-profit because we end up spending any money that we raise to do the journalism on the site and this podcast and the hosting and everything else.
We've raised money. Like,
well,
I heard about this.
But I mean, well, it's through through my Patreon, and which is I think at $95 right now, which is $15 for the hosting, $15 for the podcast.
Yes.
but so the question here too ends up being, if we are to move, and I think that the Guardian has done maybe not well, but good. I don't know if that's lesser, but it's done okay as a nonprofit. It has a nonprofit foundation behind it. It's still, I think I don't know if they still sell ads or not, but they have different entities that that create revenue. And the fact that I don't know how hard it is to convince people to either subscribe or to donate or to just in one way or another. I mean, if you go on Reddit and talk about the number one thing on the internet that's like the worst thing on the internet, it's not the Nazis, it's not it's not death threats, it's not whatever, it's goddamn pop-ups, it's advertising on websites. And there's this one of the biggest thing that worries me about, and this is a big shift of what we're talking about, but is that the coming of a new generation of people that obviously we all hate advertising, I get it, but refuse to click on it, will use ad blockers. I mean, I think this version of Google Chrome that we're probably both using has ad blocker built in now. You just have to turn it on. And so the fact that then ads aren't going to be, advertising is basically dead when it comes to the internet at total. And so it either ends up being those horrible articles that are sponsored articles where you read through something, you're like, oh my God, this article on Gizmodo that was literally this dude talking about I'm trying to remember, his brother who I think killed himself.
Oh yeah, I read that.
Actually sponsored by Volvo.
And
like
more about
what happened? Yeah. Like
and it's literally like it was it reminded me so very, very much of the episode of The Simpsons where Krusty the Clown basically turns into a version of George Carlin where he becomes this very dark comedian who's just like instead of being the kid-friendly clown, he's standing up there and he's talking against the establishment and he's bitching and whatever and he's swearing, and then the Canyonero people come by and they're like and then the next thing you know, he's back up on stage, he's like, and these corporate fat cats came up to me and I said, get out on your ass, but then they followed me home and I got in their car, and let me tell you, the Canyonero, and that's actually what that article read like, because the whole thing, there were like 3 paragraphs, that were like about detailed things that you would write as an advertiser about how awesome this car was. And then it's this like this tragic story about this dude's brother. And so, yeah, I mean, I get the sponsored content thing.
I still can't wrap my head around that piece because, like, actually, it might be interesting. We should try to dig up that the writer and ask him on and just be like, how did this come about? Like, what? We'll post I'll have to dig up that link and post in the show notes, because it is one of those fascinating things, because it's, to me, like, I look at that and I was just like, well, this is satire. Because no, was it Gizmodo or was it Jalopnik? I think. It's all the same entity, anyways.
I think it was one of those two.
Cross-post, but I mean, obviously, but it's one of those fascinating things, because it's like more and more you're seeing things like that pop up, and usually they're whatever. It's Vice does them, does a lot of them. BuzzFeed did a lot of them, and they're innocuous to a certain level, because trying to talk about something really, really deep, like that article though, where it's just like, And like, and I've always made the joke that like, I mean, I think the last episode that we were on, we were joking either on or off, I forget whether it was on or off air, that we're desperately hoping to get some whiskey distillery or beer or whatever beer company to sponsor us, and we'd be happily drinking it and take a moment and go, well, you know, when I'm thinking about destroying the powers that be through my journalism work, I like taking a sip of Teeling's whiskey. It takes the buzz off. Which actually reminds me that I was stealing that bit from Bill Hicks about he has this fantastic thing. It was just like, you know, they reached out to me. I was a classic British thing is that this company called a company that's advertising orange drink reached out to me and they were like, and I can just see be like, when I'm standing on stage, you know, decrying the patriarchy and talking about, you know, how politics is horrible, my throat gets parched, and so that's when I reach for orange drink.
Yeah, well, here I can actually shed a little bit light on this because it was Brandy Jensen from the Outline who originally pointed this out, and Patrick George, the editor-in-chief of Jalopnik, got back to her on Twitter and said, you know, hey, just wanted to say this piece wasn't SpawnCon. When we get cars to test for any reason, like nearly all car publications do, we just disclosed that it was a press loaner for the sake of transparency. Volvo did not pay our writer or us or anything like that. And it goes, there's something that goes on in the thread that's, you know, at some point, I guess the post might have been updated, I'm not sure, but then the editor, George, goes back and says, something about something being standard practice. They put full disclosure on all their stories, which somehow, if that somehow didn't come through here, it's on me, not on the author, but it's not sponsored. So apparently it wasn't sponsored content, but I think that's another thing where the lines, you know, the way advertising and things, and this is the problem with, you know, advertising as the full supporting model anyway, which is where, you know, you and I tend to disagree from time to time on, you know, as far as advertising as it relates to news, is that, you know, the lines have blurred so strongly once again that we're sort of back to that kind of you know, kind of like late 1940s, early 1950s trope where it's like, you know, well, when we're dealing with some breaking news, I light up a cool Camel whatever. 50 million American doctors can't be wrong. And I think about this article that I once saw in the Tribune that was a 3-part story about this dude who traveled to wherever the hell, to Kentucky to find the secret of the Colonel's sauce, Colonel Sanders. And it was a 3-part story. And I'm sitting there going like, you paid somebody like for this, and it's like just and to me the whole thing read like an ad for KFC. And so at this point, you know, we've blurred the lines, have blurred so much because people actually report on products so much, and so many other things have become products. News in itself has become a product, and you know that in itself is a fucking problem.
And this is the obsession and the drive for content, and the fact that you need to have article after article after article. Like, I mean, today, like, I realized that, oh my God, like VC.news hasn't had a post up in 5 days or something like that. And like, we need to get on that. And I'm just going, so I'm literally searching now. I mean, obviously at any given moment, there's like a dozen things that I could write on, and same thing with you, and like covered things or whatever. But like, I'm already doing this for my own site that no one gets paid from, no one does anything. I'm already concerned about content being driven, and I was just like, I was about to write it like just a 350 word piece because that's the minimum word count that you need to hit SEO on blog posts. And then I just stopped myself, and I'm like, no.
Yeah, I mean,
obviously it'd be good for VC.news and it would trickle down to other things, but this content obsession that we need to do spin-offs about, so it's like, well, we just got this press release and they sent us this test product. I mean, I work for an entertainment website that's 80% of what's out there that's on that site. And obviously that's entertainment, and we're not pretending to be something, deeply serious about, analyzing the open box of whatever fucking thing that
Oh
we.
God, unboxing is one of the worst trends to
I
happen in
mean,
entertainment ever.
okay, so don't watch my Around the Lens podcast open box with the new Nikon Z6.
Oh wait, you're too okay. Wait, no. Now I'm interested because it's something I like.
Yeah, exactly. But and whatever. I mean, like I get it, and that's and one of the problems too is that we're all taught to be now. The thing is that we're taught to be brand ambassadors essentially for ourselves. Is that the Aaron Cynic brand, the Zach Roberts brand? What is it that we do? And as opposed to journalists. So as much as like I love talking about gear, that's why that's why I do a podcast, Around the Lens,
Which I've been on several times.
Yes.
Like,
full disclosure. So it, for me, it just kind of comes the things that I do come naturally. Like I have another podcast that is about movies and stuff like that because I fucking love talking about movies endlessly, which you'll be on the podcast soon, talking about weirdly, somehow we've known each other for years now and just discovered that fucking Hudson Hawk is one of our mutual favorite films.
oh my God, it's one of the best movies ever made.
I mean, I love that film. I'm not quite sure I'd go that far. But
I mean, okay, maybe I spoke a little too quickly there, but I fucking love that movie.
But I mean, it's so, I mean, and there's a lot of things that, I mean, like, look at that stuff comes naturally. We'd, if it wasn't, if we were like, fuck it, we'll do a podcast of it, and whatever. But I mean, it's just, for news sites to do that, to me, it's dramatically different than be like, okay, so we need content. So like, and this is one of the problems I find is that people just go, people who aren't in the news industry go to us and go, well, it's just this onslaught of like news. It's just constant. It's unending. And it's just like, I feel so overwhelmed. And I'm like, I totally, not only as a writer and as a person who has to consume so much of this media to know what to either talk about, write about in the future. If I'm, if I get a freelance gig, then I have to do this, interview people, whatever. I have to read all of this stuff. But it's just like, back when it was just the newspaper, there would be, 100 articles a day, and 20 would be about sports, 15 would be local, whatever bullshit stuff, and then another 40 or so would be about national news stories, things that a well-informed citizen should know about.
Well, I don't think and I agree with a lot of this.
No, wait though, because I'm like slowly getting somewhere. But it's the fact that now we have 500. The New York Times will release 500 articles, at least it feels like, or Washington Post will 500 articles a day on just one news spin. Like there will be 17 spin-off stories about the Mueller investigation, when actually, there should just be 5. Because it should just be slightly longer articles that include this, and you don't need a full spin-off piece on, we found the Mueller people are having breakfast at this bagelry and what this means. And it's like, that's not an article, that's not news, that's not information that anyone needs to have. That's a great thing that might be a blog that if but it's like, that's the shit that makes the front page of the paper sometimes, or at least digitally the front page, or you get a notification on your phone about. And I think that this is, and now we have a generation of people who have been trained to expect 50 articles a day from even a blog. I mean, it's the fact that like, even if you're a small news site, you're like, oh, I'm disappointed. I don't know, Gawker or something or whatever. Your Gizmodo only posted 5 articles today, and you're like, wait a minute.
I can, I think this is somewhere where I was going to go, which is that more information and more stories is not an inherently bad thing, but the way things are being broken up, because like you said, that detail, that's what that is about. The coffee shop, that's a fucking detail that goes in a longer story. But we've spent so many years with these stories that are 350 to 500 words, and everybody's always in the like all news for a long time. Everybody's in the to be first and to get them and to scoop up the most traffic, get the fucking clicks, get those clicks, get those clicks, get those hits. And so, I mean, I remember, the outlet that I worked for, for 8 years, there were times where a story would break and there wouldn't be a lot of information. There would only be a little bit of information. And higher ups would want something published right now. We need something right now. And I'm like, I'm literally still on site gathering information. Yeah. I am still doing interviews. I am still shooting photos. This event is still happening. And they would be like, well, we need to post something right now. And so often, quite a few times what happened was, someone else would start the story just so that I could get it up, get it on the site. We need to get traffic. And then I would either add to it later and it would become a full report, or in some cases, I would just do a second story the next day. Yeah. But the fucked up thing is the story the next day, of course, would not get the same amount of traffic as the one breaking. And even though there was more information in the second story, it was a fuller story, it was a bigger picture. There was just more information and more news in it. The first one that had, not a lot of information or speculation or whatever is the thing that gobbled up the traffic. And that, I think, is what's created the situation where we're in now. And I think, I was thinking, the other day, in that sort of content, going like, oh, I need to put up more content. I mean, the last story I wrote was, a couple days ago, because I also shoot photos for a lot of people. So it's like, I have to go, where work is. And like, I had a shoot, for someone for something totally unrelated to news, journalism, or whatever. And I was like, okay, I have this. And then there is this protest down in Federal Plaza in Chicago because government workers are still on strike. Or not on, I'm sorry, they're not on strike. They should have been. Striking would have been a good thing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But, they're still furloughed. They're still, they're missing paychecks, and they're going to be out in Chicago. They were out for 3 weeks straight in the freezing cold, calling for an end to the shutdown. And I was like, I need to go back and do a story on this. But I'm like, wait a minute, I don't even have a home for this story. Yeah. And I don't even know if I'm actually going to, I could write something up for, my Patreon or for VC.news or for one or two other publications that I do work for sometimes, but I'm not going to, me personally, I'm going to be spending more effort and more time and literally stressing myself to death to get all this shit done, because that is a story that needs to be told. But at the same time, I also have to pay my bills. And here's that problem, in that oh, well, if I were to just talk to these people who were there later, talk to, call people, do interviews or whatever, would that get as much traffic as something that literally came out within an hour of it happening? And that, I think, is the problem, is that it needs to be immediate right now or whatever. And it's like, what does that do to our analysis just as humans, as people, as citizens? What does that do to the way we look at information, where if something doesn't happen, if a story comes up an hour after it breaks and we don't care about it anymore, or we've moved on to something else. And I think that is what we've seen. And that's what we were talking about, as soon as we got on this, which is just that oh yeah, this is no longer a 24-hour news cycle. It's a 4-hour news cycle at best. And that's the problem, especially.
I mean, literally, my colleague here, Lenny, was complaining. She's like, I can't fucking believe this. MSNBC right now has not actually talked about the fact that the government shutdown is being now ended because they've made a 3-week deal, because the Roger Stone indictment or the arrest came down. That's all that they're talking about. And you're going, so it's not even a problem that there's no news cycle. It's just that at this point, a lot of the ways that we consume media has just decided we're no longer even going to talk about that story. And it's weird, it's this weird thing. It's just where, I'm sure we're all exceptions. So, same thing my colleague Lenny is, it's just she's literally on her phone reading news at the same time she's watching, or listening to MSNBC and getting email updates and everything like that. So like we're not just one thing, but remember that like there's this huge swath of people that go through their daily life, and maybe they get home and they turn on whatever cable news, whether it be Cuomo or Chris Hayes or whoever, and basically that's what they consider the news. And ratings for national news broadcasts are plummeted. And but even them, last time I watched the evening news, they ended the last 5 minutes of their broadcast was, well, this is the cute story from the internets of the week. And you're going, I live on the internet. Everyone I know lives on the internet. We've seen it
Yeah.
weeks ago. And because, it was on Reddit, it's just like, and you're like, wait a minute, who the fuck are they even doing news for anymore? I mean, I guess it's just people over the age of 65 who can't figure out how to turn on their router. Like but it's just like, okay, so you just have given up on literally 60 years worth of people. Just fuck you. Like, and yeah.
No. I think also that's something that when we talk about models and new ways of doing things, which is what we need to do. There are people who are doing it right, and I think something that we lost over the past 2 decades, actually more like probably 3, but definitely the past 20 years or so, has been deep dives and information just about local news. And that's one thing that I can at least say here in Chicago. There have been folks who are not, large, outlets or whatever, people who are independent, that have been doing amazing things. And I just want to highlight, there is a story that appeared in Politico called "How Chicago's J School of the Streets is Reinventing Local News," which is all about an organization here called City Bureau that trains young journalists, but not even young journalists. I mean, you can be, if you want to get into journalism and work with these guys, you can, no matter what age you are. But what they do is they're training people, and they're training them to focus on the sort of more local reporting that everyone misses and everyone wants to do, because at the end of the day, like, yeah, we are all concerned about national news and all that kind of stuff, but there is a world of other news out there that you're not hearing about, and that scales up, because when you miss out on the local stuff, very, very quickly that becomes related to a national story. Especially in a city here like Chicago, where you're talking, when you talk about Trump's border wall and the government shutdown and things like that, you're talking about things that you're talking about things that affect neighborhoods here where plenty of immigrants live, who are directly affected by these policies, and those kinds of like stories there get lost in a cycle that definitely skews national, but also skews towards what's already being talked about and what's already being reported. And so it's commentary on top of commentary on top of commentary, and it's like, do we really need 5 shows on the same cable news channel that have 8 panelists that are rehashing the same story all day until another one breaks, and then it's that same story, or couldn't we? And then when they have downtime, you look at MSNBC and it's like, oh, we're gonna do this weird series on prisons that doesn't even talk about how bad prisons are, but more talks about like it's a bad series. So it's like, well, couldn't we find some of that on these larger networks to do deeper dives and bigger investigations? And I think people are doing that at local levels, and I think that is a model that people need to start talking about for larger outlets. But that again, I think I've probably rambled.
It's
gotten off the rails here.
I mean, this is actually an off the rails thing too, but it's one of the things that I'm finding with all of these, a lot of, I mean, not all, but a lot of these upstart, like City Bureau or when the reboots of a lot of, like Gawker or whatever. I mean, I guess Gawker's already lost most of their staff again. But,
I wouldn't put City Bureau in that category at all.
Oh, no, not. I'm talking about is the fact that like, and maybe I'm wrong, but like when I look at the staffs, and I'm happy that I'm seeing, obviously I'm happy that I'm seeing a diverse staff. Except the one thing I'm missing here is that everyone here looks like they're under 30, and which is good and bad but we're losing like one of the first things. If I had suddenly got $100 million or whatever amount of money to start up a proper newsroom and news publication, is some of the people that have been laid off at like the big newspapers that have been covering beats for decades, like that they have all this institutional knowledge is being lost because that when they walk, they can't, basically a lot of them can't take a job for less than $60,000 or whatever. But obviously our generation and younger kind of, well, we really can't, but we're more in tune to it to at least do it. And so like it's just one of those things where it's just like I like that we're having new voices and like we're having, but it's just one of those, like, I know there's a lot of photographers. I'm trying to remember the name of the fantastic African-American photographer in Chicago, who's like fucking award-winning or whatever, and I believe he got laid off when, was it the Trib? Laid off their entire...
Oh, no, that was the Sun Times.
Sorry, Sun Times initially laid off their entire... I'm talking about years ago, but...
No, I remember when the Sun Times laid off their whole staff.
And so... no, but it's just like... And it's just so... You don't see... He's not going to get hired at... And I'm not picking on City Bureau, it's just literally in front of me, so I just want that noted. But like, he's not going to get hired at City Bureau.
Well, yeah, and what what I'm saying is what they do, what they're doing is something that's different. They're training people, and then they work with other publications to get these stories out there.
He's not going to get hired at this at the new whatever, if DNA Info or
Club Chicago is what you're thinking of.
Rebooted, or he's not going to get, or at any of these new sites. I mean, BuzzFeed sure is fucking going to hire him. And to me that's wild. And as a person who, I'm not getting hired either. So, at 37, but it's interesting that like, it's just, as we have these new and more these new upstarts, whether that be BuzzFeed a decade ago, or whether it be any number of other publications, Mike or whatever, is that like, it's just, we're losing a lot of voices that were fucking fantastic to introduce new good voices. But it's one of those things that worries about in general about the future of journalism. But I think that's basically a whole different show. And
I think that is a different show. But what I will say to that is that, again, and I'll go back to two things we've already discussed in this conversation, which is that, one, Chris Hayes talking about, what if there is literally no profitable model for digital news? Well, what the fuck does Chris Hayes make again a year? And that's the thing. Just a cursory Google search. Okay. Chris Hayes himself is worth $5 million. And his salary is assumed to be about, around about that. So, it's a matter of going like, well, where are you putting your money and your resources? Again, you're still putting them at the top. You're putting them in all these people. And so at that point, then I'm going to go back to that other quote, which is that, reinvest revenue in the business itself instead of draining off profits to enrich investors, or giving people six-figure, seven-figure salaries. So we could try to do that, or we could just abolish capitalism, which I'm cool with too.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, we had this, I think when, what's her name? Megyn Kelly was officially let go. My God, was it last week or was it actually this week?
That's what I'm saying. We can't even remember if that was last week or this week.
And there's an all news story, and she walked away with $30 million. to literally not do anything. And she walked away with no non-disclosure agreement and no non-disparagement. Excuse me, no non-disparagement. So she could literally go and take a job at Fox News back again, or go to CBS or whatever. Then sit down and write a book about how horrible NBC was to her and everything like that, and cash in on that as well. And then, like, one thing that I looked up was, so if you win the Pulitzer, it's about, you get a little medal, and obviously get attention, and it helps, that in general helps, supposedly, at least. But you get $15,000 cash prize. And there's about 20 people who win the Pulitzer every year. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
I'm sorry. I literally no audio. Sorry, it just was coming through, so it was super quiet. So 20 people a year times 15,000 times basically 100 years equals almost as much money, or around about as much money as she made by not having to do anything. And so you go, almost every single, probably every single Pulitzer Prize winner ever has not made, for the Pulitzer Prize, at least the award, as much money as she was to just leave NBC. And you go, wow, like, wait a minute. And like, we can make arguments about value, and like, there are certain people who, like, if I'm trying to think of a good journal.
Honestly, you won't even find, like, I can think of some of the best journalists in the world, who literally no one's ever heard of, and I love them to death. And there are people who could use millions of dollars. But at the same time, you're probably never going to hear me say, oh yes, you should, this person is absolutely worth $30 million for this one time, in addition to making several million again every year. Because at the end of the day, what we're really talking about here is, how much money does one human being actually need? And regarding, the Megyn Kelly thing, one of the people, so that was January 12th, by the way. And, one of the comments you got, when you said, don't fucking tell me that networks don't have money to pay journalists, photographers. Because of this, is, somebody was like, I'm no fan of Megyn Kelly, but were you also pissed when Roger Ailes got, 45 million, or when Billy Bush got 40 million? And the answer is hell fucking yes. Fuck those people. Like, there is no reason. I mean, this is, I mean, we're living in a world where, there's a handful of people who are above Brewster's Millions bets, and then there are all these other people who are just doing, who are living Brewster's Millions, and then there's the fucking other, 99% of us, to pull that old, quote out of the woodshed.
Somebody should, start a movement with that as their catchphrase, and possibly, not, what's the word I'm looking for? Just be in a place and stay there, not actually move. What? I feel like it's familiar. Did someone try that before?
It's. I will say, long ago, before that movement began, I was talking to a guy, a very, very local independent magazine that has not existed for at least 15 years, but was based out of Chicago. I remember it was back during the build-up to the Iraq War. I did work for that magazine, and it was a very niche kind of like indie magazine. It wasn't, there was a lot of entertainment or whatnot. I did a lot of record reviews for like punk bands and things, but I also did some other stuff. But I remember talking to that guy once, and he was, and this was back in like probably 2002. This gentleman was like, we really should, if we want to stop this war, if we want to stop this stuff, we need to have a protest that never ends. And when, that other movement came about 10 years later, somebody who I had also worked with and was a very good friend of mine, among other things, at the time was like, hey, remember that time Said editor said we should have a protest that never ends, and I was like, oh, holy shit, we're doing that now. That's actually happening now.
It's
Years later.
happening.
But no, I mean, I think the point here is that we need to start talking about, like, well, how much does any individual human being need? And in a world that, if things were equitably distributed, where everyone could live in abundance. And
I mean, I think that we don't even have to look. We can look, like, we don't even have to be like involved in the world of like talking about what is socialism. We can
I
look
never
within
said socialism.
No, like what does one person need or whatever. I think that that's because obviously, we unfortunately, or for whatever you want to believe, it's capitalism we have right at this moment. But it's so even within the world, like, it just seems like bad business. If you're a news department and you only have so much, and so you just not only you wrote one of the worst fucking contracts ever fucking to be known to man, the fact that, like, hell, I've worked for places momentarily for a couple $100 and they had me sign a non-disclosure agreement because it's in general good. I mean, whether it's bad for the person or whatever, but it's good for the corporation to do that. And so when you're talking about NBC News signing a contract with a person like Megyn Kelly, I don't understand, like, how do these people get the business deals that they do? Obviously, they have agents, they have whatever, but like, and even if they sat down a boardroom and figured out the numbers or whatever and said, this person, Megyn Kelly, is going to be worth $60 million to us. She will make at least that much money back. And I go, well, if she says something, a person who continually says something racist and stupid, is she's done this before, she has a track record. Like, okay, so if NBC hired me and they paid me any amount of money, and I would assume that there is you can't tweet to the president, go fuck yourself on a regular basis like I do, I would go, that is a reasonable thing because you're NBC and I'm working for you, and that's the thing. It does not infringe in my First Amendment rights, again, because it's not the government or whatever. But either way, like, it would be a demand that I would goddamn well assume that NBC would put upon me. And so it's wild to me that it's so financially, fiscally, whatever, to the stockholders, to everyone, irresponsible that they did this. And so that to me is when I go, what is NBC in the business for then? NBC News, what are they in the business for?
Well, I mean, and that's the thing that we have to, like, just, realize is that none of these people are our friends. None of these people are actually in the business to help the to help the actual business, to help the actual, product. And God, I hate that word. But these people are here to fleece as much money out of everyone and anyone they can.
Yeah.
And that's it. And that's the fucking problem. You know what I mean? Like, this is something that, again, it's all part of a larger framework. And, the problem is we're still all scrapping here to figure out, how to get the most of the crumbs that the larger framework is giving us, while, again, a handful of people are, living on fucking golden yachts or whatever.
Yeah. The owner of the Washington football team, he just bought $100 million yacht. Never mind, it's a really ugly fucking yacht. I recommend look it up and go, wait, it's $100 million? What? Like, at least one thing you're going to give the Saudis when they buy their yachts is they look interesting. They look like $100 million yacht. This one, it just looks like a big boat. Like, it's weird. But anyway.
No, I mean, I think, and I literally said this on another podcast the other day, and it's weird how the other day was, feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only 4 days ago. But I had this conversation with a friend of mine last week, which at this point feels like 2 years ago. You know, where, you know, people act like, you know, serfdom and feudal culture died, you know, during the Middle Ages, and capitalism is what took over and what ended that. And, that's why we're here, there. And it's like, no, we just swapped kings and lords for CEOs and senators, and that's where we're at. Like, and, we're also, I don't know. Now I'm just exasperated and tired. Sorry. And shit, we've been doing, there were like 9 other things we were going to hit on, and we've just spent the entire time talking about the state
we
of
just
media.
pulled an MSNBC and only talked about one story in a huge news story week. But
we
you know
did,
what?
but neither of us got paid 6 or 7 figures for it, or anything for it.
Yes.
So you get what you get.
Negative. But yeah, that's what you
and
get.
We've done this ourselves, and that's the other thing. It's not like we have directors or editors or producers or camera people, or any of the hundreds of people who are support staff in newsrooms, which I think again is something that doesn't get talked about, is the fact that the first people to get laid off. I mean, shit, the first people to face cuts back years ago were the fact checkers. Literally the most important people who we need right now more than anything. We're the first people to get laid off way long ago.
So, but I mean, that's actually it's actually it's a good point, because I mean, one of the other problems with having all of these independent journalists out there doing, whether it be our individual blogs and things like that, is that there is no larger direction towards, like, one of the things that you think about the Washington Post, and you think about the coverage that they were able to do for, again, you can go back 50 years and go and talk about the way they were able to cover things like the Watergate break-in, is the fact that they had, it wasn't just one dude with an obsession. It was an entire newsroom operation that was able to bring down the power of the Washington Post even then, to say, no, A, you can't just like throw this guy in jail, or B, you can't, figure out ways to fuck over his life. Is that we now live in a world where A, we're all freelancers, and B, we have newsrooms. And while sometimes that can produce better journalism, one of the biggest problems is the fact that if either one of us go out to a protest and we get arrested, we don't have the protections. We don't have, and we don't have the backup and fact checking. I mean, like, I would love to have a fact checker working to double check my own. I'm a fact checker. I do this as one of the many things I do for a living, and I would still, for my own work, because you can never fact check your own work, just like you can never do a good grammar check on your own work, and you need somebody else usually to read it out loud.
Yeah, and that's why copy editors and fact checkers are and editors in general are so important.
And we're the first people to go again. And same thing with photo editors are long gone as well. I mean, they went ages ago. But yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I think there's this weird double-edged sword, because there are newsrooms out there who are still operating right now, who there is something that is a story or could be a story, regardless. I mean, it is a story is a story, and it should be told. And I think the thing that, like, one of the things that I remember dealing with 20 years ago was the sort of gatekeeper mentality. Before the internet became what it is now, there was definitely a gatekeeper mentality, and there still is one today, where as a freelancer, it can be very, very difficult, either if you're just starting out, or if you haven't worked with a publication or whatever, to like get a foot in the door to tell a story that needs to be told. And that's a problem, because you would have big newsrooms or big media or whatever look at something and go, oh, that's not a big issue, that's that only affects 100 people in a small area or whatever, so it's not news. And it's like, no, actually that is news. And I think that's why we saw the rise. It's partly of why, if you go back 20 years ago to Seattle in 99, there was definitely a huge push of independent media. I mean, indiamedia.org got their start in Seattle in '99, and that kind of changed the game. And it was because you saw, these sort of like, these, your kind of standard, big newsroom reporters coming out to this protest who were dismissive of protesters, quoted the cops, quoted the mayor, and then left. And it was like, well, yeah, but everybody got tear gassed for no reason. Why are you talking about this? And so I think that, kind of spurned, and you look later during, a few years later during, anti-war protests, in the buildup, and then even, after the Iraq War started, those were underreported. But they were picked up by, independent journalists and whatnot. Flash forward another 10 years, and you've got the same problem with Occupy. And so there's definitely this kind of like thing where it's like, oh, well, this is no big deal. This is, and that's something that I think, freelancers and indie journalists and live streamers and, folks have been able to challenge, which I think is good. And I think people should keep doing that. But the problem is when you do this, you literally have no one else supporting you. And that's the larger problem, is that like we go to jail, because the cops pop us and not a broadcast camera. We're paying our own, we're not getting out of jail that night. Our gear, gets busted covering a demonstration. We're not getting a new camera the next day. And like even simple things where it's just like, sometimes it's just, as a freelance journalist that, you're covering a story and maybe you're dealing with an editor who isn't even local. And you're just dealing with that editor over email. And you've never, you're talking to them on the phone or dealing with them over email, but they only have X amount of time to invest in fact checking and editing your story, and then they have to move on. And that's there is an infrastructure problem in media, and that's something that I don't know how we address, because of course that's also given rise to people who are like, well, all media is fake news and the only real news is my YouTube channel where I spend 2 hours every day talking into a camera and doing and that's it, and I am the truth. And that's that's not fucking good. And when I'm not doing that, I'm selling boner pills and whatever, like to pay my bills. And that's and so we've come to this point where like you talk about sustainability, and again, what's sustainable is creating and creating news and creating stories and creating just creating, being able to do the job of providing information, and providing analysis and providing reporting without having to worry about some dude's fucking boat payments, like, or or some VC company's growth or whatever. I don't know. Again, this is the point where I'm just rambling.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's I don't know what else to add these days. I mean, and it's it's problematic because I mean I feel like almost every on Around the Lens podcast when we talk about photojournalism, we talk about the same issues. Is the fact that like as freelancers, there's a lot of things, a lot of benefits of being a freelancer, but there's also the biggest thing is that if we want to grow as journalists, it's actually tough, actually a lot of times tougher to do that because we don't work with anyone and we don't learn outside of things like this. Like we all now, like almost everybody I know has a podcast or two where we talk about issues and we and things that we used to do, I assume at least, we used to do sitting around a newsroom and and kind of after hours at the bar or whatever, and having these conversations about either the future of the industry or how tough it is to cover this story or do whatever, bitch and complain. But now this is our new bar, basically. So
the internet is our new bar.
This is now basically me again. If you run a whiskey distillery or a pub or whatever, and you're looking to sponsor to get out to a whole like couple dozen people, I will happily shill for whatever your product is. Unless of course it's tequila, and then I think it's a really bad idea that you sponsor me, because tequila is my one weakness. So
and that's why I would never. I mean, that's why I would. I have the same. I have the same caveat, but with gin.
Really, gin?
Oh,
I could drink like a bottle. I have like a gin tolerance, like when I was born.
See, I have a whiskey tolerance, a vodka tolerance, and a tequila tolerance, but gin is going to be the thing where I like end up in the middle of the street lighting off fireworks way too soon, because I will always end up in the middle of the street lighting off fireworks.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of gin will get me there, 2 hours before that becomes acceptable to the people around me. And that has literally happened, and I'm not going to divulge further of that story. But
you can just go through the Chicago Tribune's police reports and find.
Nope, won't find it. You can go through. You could probably go through Flickr accounts of neighborhood fireworks and find some of mine. Or you can find my own, because I stopped lighting off a lot of my own fireworks here, because where I live now, I have reasons, and so I just go out and shoot photos of other people's fireworks now. So
yep. Well, it's also a good reminder, if you have Flickr photos on Flickr, February 4th I think is their basically if you have anything more than I think 1,000 photos, they're going to delete them.
Oh no shit! I was not aware of this.
You can go on Flickr and download your archive. It takes a couple days, so I recommend setting that. It doesn't take a couple days to download it. It takes a couple days for them to ready the download for you. So if you have a archive of Flickr photos and you decide not to pay for the pro account, I highly recommend to go to Flickr and download those fuckers, because excuse me, a lot of them are going to disappear.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yep.
I should. I really have not used Flickr in many years, so
I haven't either. I actually went through and like I have everything else archived other places, so I'm not really all that worried about downloading a 2 meg version of a photo. But that's it's again. I mean, that's one of those things. I mean, like I think about. I mean, we should end this sort of thing, but I used to use Flickr as back when WordPress was just starting to be a thing. I used to use Flickr and as a site to host my photos and then embed the photos in there, because there was I think there, at least whatever hosting thing that I was using, there was a very small amount of photo space you could upload for the blog. And now I think, oh, great, whatever. I mean, thank God I moved on from that blog, but there's a lot of sites that relied off of Flickr embeds that now are screwed, because those photos are just going to disappear in about a week and a half. So yeah, about a week.
That's good to know, because it's like I used Flickr briefly in spurts here and there, and it was never I don't even, it was just one of those things where it was like, oh, this is a thing that people use now and I should use this. But the first, I don't know, long time that I used that site, many years, like I just went back through my my photo stream, and it was like, oh yeah, I've got photos up there from 2008 from the Obama rally, but they are all crap ass like BlackBerry photos. That it was just like, oh, this is a place to warehouse this shit. But that's good information.
Yeah. So Aaron, what do you have going on that people should check out this week?
Well, like I said, I was when I was talking about CEOs and serfs, that was all in reference to a multi-part series I'm doing for shadowproof.com right now on the Chicago 2019 municipal elections. But what I am doing is I'm not, for this series, I'm not talking to candidates for anything. I'm only talking to community organizers, activists, people who've been fighting to get their issues at the forefront of this election cycle, and tell the story from what they want, from their next mayor or from their next alderman. The most recent story that I did was on TIFs and mega projects, which all kind of which is all about community development and investment, where right now there's been, and this fight actually, this was trending on Twitter last night, was that there is a big fight over a mega project where, you know, a developer is going to get nearly $1 billion in tax increment financing money for a mega project that is going to gentrify a whole other area that, you know, no one, you know, there were hours and hours of testimony in city council from people against moving this project forward, and yet, of course, the city council moved it forward. And you know, you might say, I'm not from Chicago, I don't care, but it's been national news because, of course, you know, we have our longest running city councilman, who has been a city councilman for more than half a century, is looking at corruption charges and a federal investigation. And it turned out this week, part of that information came from another alderman who also has corruption charges against him, wore a wire. And so it's like somebody wore a wire and then somebody else wore a wire. And then, you know, so it's like all of this is happening in the face. So Chicago's it's an interesting time to be in Chicago. But my next story, which will be published next week, is all about folks who have been fighting for police accountability in Chicago. You know, what they think of the race for mayor and what they think their next representatives need to do. And that is a hugely important thing here because, you know, we just wrapped the trial of Jason Van Dyke, who is the cop who shot Laquan McDonald 16 times and killed him, which resulted in a lot of things. But he was just sentenced to 6 years and I think 9 months. I want to say it's 6 years and 9 months in prison. You know, from a potential sentence that could have been, I want to say, close to 90 years. And so there's a lot of, you know, reaction to that, and, you know, in the community and whatnot. And so, you know, my next story is going to be about, you know, how police, you know, the movements that have been built around police accountability that go back way further than the Laquan McDonald case, could affect and should affect, you know, our upcoming election, which is in literally a month.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm working on. What are you working on, Zach?
I am actually, well, one of the reasons I'm out here in California right now is I'm working on my project about kind of a history of white supremacy leading up to Charlottesville, for lack of a better thing. But I also, you can head over, oh, by the way, you can also check out Aaron Cynic's latest photo essay, Let Them Eat Wall, at visu.news as well. And also on his Patreon.
Which I really wanted to do an update, but again, I was so busy that day and I was just like, I can't. Yeah. I don't have time. But anyway, go on, sorry.
Well, I did a piece on, you can go to visu.news or nationofchange.org to see my latest two pieces. One was on the the Los Angeles Women's March, which actually, I like the LA's Women's March a lot better than the DC ones for lots of different reasons. But it's just, there's a lot more community, it seemed like a smaller town, even though LA is much larger. Smaller towns, but like the numbers were still great, and people actually kind of had local issues as opposed to just impeach the president, that's all that matters, or whatever. So that was nice to cover something other than like DC protest world. But also, which is a happy news that also affects your state, is that Illinois just dropped out of Crosscheck, the voter suppression program that the former Secretary of State of Kansas used to run, which matches similar names to boot out basically black and brown people off the voter rolls. That Illinois just left it. So one by one, hopefully we are winning this victory against voter suppression. And
we can hope. I don't think that would have happened if our election didn't shake out the way it did.
Yeah.
Again, not that I have any trust in a different billionaire, but you know.
Well, this actually this was I mean the first time they had attempted the assembly. Is it assembly in
General Assembly? Yeah.
General Assembly. General Assembly voted to basically leave, and then Rauner vetoed that.
Yep.
And then just now, or just this week, the elections board actually voted 8-0 to leave the program. So I'm not quite sure. This is the maddening thing about election coverage. Every single state has different procedures, whether the election board can do something separate from the Secretary of State's, or whether it's this weird thing. But Illinois is leaving Crosscheck,
which I am very happy about.
Yes. The only thing to watch out, though, and this is something I think we're gonna have to FOIA, is one of the reasons why Illinois left Crosscheck was to join a similar program with Indiana that they're starting, and Indiana literally said, basically, we need you to leave Crosscheck before you can join it with us. And that possibly could have to do with the fact that Greg Palast and Jesse Jackson are suing Illinois, and so they did about Crosscheck. So it could be that, or it could be likely just Chris Kobach is not the weird power that he once was. Hopefully he won't become the next DHS secretary, because we're going to find out who that is, I think, next week.
Oh, God.
Yeah, no. Yeah, supposedly we'll find out who. I don't know if we'll find out who the permanent one is, but Nielsen is the DHS secretary. Current DHS secretary is supposed to be leaving after Davos. So I don't know what after Davos means in the terms of her leaving, but I know Trump has wanted her to leave, and especially after the fact that, which weirdly we didn't mention this at all, we'll have to do another podcast on it, is the fact that the shutdown is supposedly being averted, or not averted because it's already been averted, but ended, and Trump is not getting any money for his border wall for at least the next 3 weeks. So
he's got he's got 3 weeks to shore up how he's going to declare a national emergency.
Exactly, yeah. So I may be back down here in 3 weeks when he declares, when war is declared.
At that point, who knows? Like, so, 3 weeks from now, no, I'll still be here. But 4 weeks from now, I could go somewhere else. 3 weeks from now, I'm still dealing with elections here. But after February 26th, well, then, I can go another place. But then again, we also have an election that's going to happen in April. So
fun times.
Well, that's the tough part about being a freelancer, is that, you have to make choices.
Choices that keep the eviction notice off the front door.
And also, again, like, I'm a local reporter. Like, I'm a Chicago person. I mean, I can talk about national things. I've done national things, but at the end of the day, I'm still a person who's very attached to, my city that everybody likes to dump on, which, you open this podcast with, as people do, as we've done 2 episodes of this podcast on, which is that, what the hell is happening in Chicago? Well, if you're going to dunk on my city, like, I'm going to have to be here to refute that.
Anyone who wants to dunk on Syracuse can do it pretty much anytime they want. I will be like, well, actually, what you got wrong is it's 100 times worse than what you're saying.
The only thing I want to do regarding Syracuse is have conversations about Earth Crisis. So we can do that anytime.
Yeah. Anyway, Aaron, it was excellent talking to you. Where can where can people find your work?
At Aaron Cynic on Twitter, Instagram. Yeah, both of those. Or you go to aaroncynic.net.
Cool.
Basically, just look up Aaron Cynic. You'll find me.
Yep. And you can support Aaron's work at patreon.com/Aaron Cynic. You can support my work at patreon.com/ZD Roberts. How did I screw up mine? And you can find me on Twitter at ZD Roberts. You can find me on Facebook at Zach D. Roberts. And find my portfolio at zdroberts.com. So,
and you should always look up VZU.news.
That is true. Thank you for actually ending the show with the site that we're doing this for.